Hello, my friends, and welcome to Momentum Boost. I'm your host, Adrienne Gold Davis, and I'm so happy that you're joining us today. Now, if you're visiting for the first time, just take some time, look around, get acquainted with our new layout. But if you're returning, feel free to make yourself right at home. Now, if you're having any technical trouble, just click the hand icon that you'll find on the lower right-hand side chat box and just choose the relevant icon. You can also ask our guest a question by clicking on the question mark in the lower left-hand side of the chat. Now, all questions, by the way, are visible to everybody. So if you wanted privacy or anonymity, just make sure that you click on the little hand icon and you'll get just that. So in this boost, we're going to step into the chapters of Rabbi Dr. Ariel Burger's life and into the legendary classroom of Nobel laureate Elie Wiesel. Author and teacher, Rabbi Ariel Burger is an authority on spirituality, on social change, and on the arts. Through his book, Witness, Lessons from Elie Wiesel's Classroom, Ariel chronicles his journey from boyhood to manhood under the guidance of his late friend, mentor, and activist, Elie Wiesel. So Ariel, before we begin, I want to welcome you, but I want you to set the stage. Give us a brief bio of Elie Wiesel for those of us who may not know who he was, and then you can become the artist and you can paint the picture of him for us.
Thank you, Adrienne. Good to be with all of you. I don't see all of you, but I'm with all of you. It's great to be together in this moment when it's hard to be physically together. I'm grateful for these moments of connection. Elie Wiesel was first and foremost a teacher, although a lot of people didn't know that and still don't know that about his life. He was born in 1928, and if those of you listening have read his first book, Night, which is required reading in many schools across the globe, you know the contours of his early life. He grew up in a religious Jewish household, and he, together with his family, was deported in 1944, in the spring of 1944, from his little town called Sziget in Hungary to Auschwitz and other concentration camps. His mother and sister were killed upon arrival, murdered by the Nazis. And he, Elie Wiesel, and his father went through the camps together, and his father passed away towards the end, right before liberation. And after the war, Elie Wiesel was an orphan of the Holocaust, broken, shattered in spirit, unclear about what his future held and how to choose life again. But something in him did not allow him to give up, didn't allow him to give in to despair. And over time, he became a student. He went back to his studies. He became a journalist. And he discovered that his two older sisters were alive. And he, over time, became a human rights activist, where he took the lessons of the Holocaust, his experience, and the deep pain and disappointment of the world's silence in the face of Jewish suffering during those times and those days. He took that as a motivating force and a message to say that wherever people are suffering, we have to stand up and we have to be there bearing witness, paying attention, raising our voices, protesting, changing the destiny and the fate of people who are oppressed when we can, and when we cannot, at least to bear witness and to raise our voices. And he spent his life doing that. Teaching, writing. He wrote over 40 books of fiction and nonfiction, celebrations of Jewish wisdom, and novels exploring some of the enduring questions raised by the Holocaust. And he was also a teacher, and he was my teacher.
What a blessing for you. And I understand from your book that your own childhood was somewhat complicated, and that you grew up, seeking to bridge community, perhaps, and self-expression, religion, and art yourself in your own way. Can you take us back to when you were 15 years old? And you said you felt seen for the very first time, truly seen, when you met Elie Wiesel. Take us back.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in a very complex, beautiful, vibrant, multifaceted Jewish life and two households, because my parents were not together when I was growing up. Mm-hmm. I went to a very religious school. So I was immersed in text study and Talmud study and the beautiful celebration of wisdom, of controversy, of complexity. Those were my days. But I was also the kid in the corner of the room who was always doodling in the corner of the page of Talmud that we were studying. And so I was torn as a child between the world of tradition and study and our heritage, our Jewish heritage and its wisdom, and the very strong, urgent desire and need to be living a life of self-expression, and thinking a lot about and wrestling a lot with how those things fit together. And when I was 15, I was really in the thick of that struggle, and I met Professor Wiesel right in that moment. So my stepfather knew him. Elie Wiesel, many people don't know that Elie Wiesel was a lover of music, and he was very musical. And he had a life of music that was very private for the most part. My stepfather is a conductor, a choral conductor, and the driving force behind an international movement of Jewish choral music and connection through music. And he and Elie Wiesel did some work together, musical projects in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s. And so 1990, I was privileged to go to a lecture of Professor Wiesel at the 92nd Street Y in New York. My stepfather took me there. And after the lecture, there was a small reception room where people could wait and could say hello to Professor Wiesel. And I was privileged to be on that line. And I remember the moment you're referring to, when it was my turn. I was at the front of that line.
Right.
And Professor Wiesel would stay as long as it took until all the people were done. He was very gracious that way. And I walked up to him, and I was very intimidated and in awe. And he held his hand out to me, and he said his name as if I had no idea who he was, with tremendous modesty. And then he looked in my eyes and he said, "Come and see me and bring a question." So that was the moment when I felt really seen, where I didn't feel like I had to leave anything behind when I would go to talk to him. And I started to go to him. It took me a little time to build the holy chutzpah to really take him up on his invitation, but I did eventually. And that started a series of conversations that became a relationship that lasts really to this day, because relationships don't end when someone leaves the physical world. It started when I was 15 with that invitation to share a question.
Wow. You know, it's interesting. That was a blessed moment for you. And clearly it shows me what you also said, which is that while people think of him as a writer, I mean, and of course, Oprah thinking that she put him on the map when she chose him for his book club and her book club and went to Auschwitz with him and so on. He saw himself primarily as a teacher. And I understand that it's the teacher's job to evoke from the student a question. And that's what he did from you. How did you come up with the question? What did you, well, if you don't want to share what you asked him, then tell me how you came to decide what you should ask him.
Well, first of all, he loved questions. He celebrated questions, and he said there is quest in questions. And he also said answers are dangerous and can divide us, but questions always bring us together. And answers are an ending and questions are a beginning. So he really believed in questions and asking questions even when there could be no answer. There were certain questions that he asked in his life that really have no answer.
What were those questions? Yes, what were those questions?
Where was God during the Holocaust? How could a good, benevolent, loving, all-powerful Hashem, a God, allow such a thing to happen? And what is it about human beings that causes us to remain indifferent when other people suffer? What is it about us, and why can't we change that permanently? Those are some of the questions that he asked that really have no answer. I mean, he said, if anyone offers an answer, I will reject it in principle. If someone tries to explain the Holocaust to me, why did the Holocaust happen? I will reject the answer as inherently offensive. But he distinguished between answers and responses. It's important to say that that doesn't mean that therefore there's nothing to do. You might be the response to that question. Another act of kindness might be the proper response to that question. Acting on behalf of people who are suffering and who can't defend themselves might be a response to the Holocaust, but it's certainly not an answer. Those were his questions.
I'm sorry, you're saying not to search for answers, but to search for responses? Is that
Right.
how you maintain hope, do you think?
That's how you keep going in the face of questions that are so overwhelming. And they can be cosmic, global questions, or they can be very personal questions. I think we all struggle with personal questions that don't have answers. And when we hit those moments of darkness where we don't know how to continue because we need an answer, Professor Wiesel would say, stop looking for an answer, look for a response. What can you do driven by that experience, or driven by the loss, or driven by grief or fear or whatever it is, can you turn it somehow into positive action on behalf of someone else, even if it's very small? That's a response, not an answer. That's how you keep going.
Oh, you know what? If that, Dianu, if that was all you shared with us today, now, how do you think he formulated that? Is that because he was raised asking philosophical, religious questions himself? Do you think the actual work of asking questions prepares you to the answer is not an answer, but a response?
I think, first of all, that this is a very essential Jewish kind of move. And he was brought up deeply immersed in Jewish study. So when you get deeply into Jewish study, you start to notice that the conversation that's happening about a verse in the Bible and extends over centuries and then millennia, and you have sages and thinkers from different times and places talking to each other in a rich conversation, it's really never ending. And the invitation in that is that you can contribute to that conversation as well. And that means that if someone answered the question 200 or 500 or 1,000 years ago, and it was done, right, then there's no invitation anymore. So the culture of Jewish study is very much about that invitation to continue to ask and to continue to search and to go deeper and to find new ways of looking and new insights. I think that was Elie Wiesel's young training, and I think that really helped him to continue to never give up, and also to never settle for an answer that was really unsatisfying or superficial, as other people did. There were Jewish thinkers who answered those questions in ways that were not satisfying even to their own followers sometimes. So he really avoided that trap of the kind of addiction to answers that we sometimes have. And he was very comfortable with questions. And I think that came from his study of Jewish text.
It's quite remarkable, you know. It's like when you understand that you can never understand everything there is to understand, then you understand. You become the response. So let's look at the world we're living in right now. Obviously, we have a global pandemic. We've had a huge uprising around race and injustice. We've got this back to school thing. We've got there's been so much, and he suffered so greatly. What do you think he would have to say about the response to the times we're in right now?
Well, I have to say first that I cannot speak in his name. I don't know for sure what he would say, because he often surprised us.
Huh.
But I can share things that he said that I think are very relevant to this moment. First of all, when he talked about history, he would often refer to the cry, the tears in history, and also the celebration and the joy in history. And there's something important about holding those two things together. So not shying away from the challenges, not pretending that there aren't very difficult, serious things going on in the world right now, some of which have deep roots, some of which we thought were long resolved but are opened up again, like the rise of anti-Semitism the last several years in this country. You know, many people thought that was sort of over. Here we are again. The recapitulation of an encounter with questions of systemic racial injustice, we didn't think that was resolved. But we know for sure that those things are unresolved and require attention. And if we pretend that those things are not real challenges, we're missing an opportunity to help. On the other hand, if we only focus on the challenges, we're going to burn out very quickly as individuals and as groups. So he always said, find ways to celebrate, find the positive aspects of this moment. The fact, for example, that many people are connecting by Zoom or whatever platform you use across great distances in ways that were unthinkable 6, 7, 8 months ago. So programming that was local is now more global. That's bringing people together. People are more vulnerable and sharing more of their own personal experience because everyone is in the same position of not knowing what the future holds. That's scary, but it also opens hearts sometimes. So he would say, look at those positive moments and look at those positive aspects so that it gives you strength to address the negative things, the challenging things. That's one message I think that he shared with us often in difficult and troubling times.
And how would he have defined, in your estimation, hope? How might you define hope? Is it some sort of equation of, you know, living in reality plus being proactive, knowing you can't fix it all or understand it, knowing there's no answer, plus your action equals hope? What do you think?
Well, I like that, but he would say it somewhat differently. He would say, what is hope? You're asking, what is hope? And Professor Wiesel would say, hope is a choice. And it's a gift that we give to one another. It's not a feeling that in the face of real challenges goes away because there's not enough evidence for hope. Hope is not evidence-based. It's in fact, it's a moral choice. And I would add, it's the first moral choice.
How so?
Because the choice to hope means you're staying involved and engaged. You're not leaving the scene. You're not leaving the challenge because you're not giving up. You're not giving into despair. If you give into despair, then you're still contributing to the situation, but you're doing so through indifference. You're allowing whatever evil or suffering is going to happen anyway. But if you choose hope, then you stay involved and you'll do something, even if it's small. You'll find a way of acting with kindness, compassion, with courage. And that can make all the difference, even if it's just to one person in one moment. So hope is a moral choice that leads to other moral choices.
Okay, let me make sure I understand this. So for our listeners, if one chooses to have hope, many people will say, you have hope in a hopeless situation. But considering a situation hopeless is focusing on outcome as opposed to process. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think the truth is, I think that both hope and hopelessness impact outcomes. Because I think if people choose hopelessness, they are almost guaranteeing a less positive or even a negative outcome. If I have a challenge in my work life and I say, there's no way I'm going to succeed in solving this problem and meeting the challenge, then I'm pretty much guaranteeing that I'm not going to meet the challenge. If I have hope, I still might fail, right? Hope is not being naive. Hope can be very realistic, but it allows me to stay deeply engaged. I can access all the inner resources I have and bring them to the challenge because I'm still hoping. I'm still seeing a vision of what's possible. I can reach out to other people and build friendships and connections and alliances to help me move forward in the challenge. All of that comes from hope.
Is there a Jewish model for that? A particular Jewish model, other than, of course, even when the sword is on your neck, you're not supposed to despair?
Well, that's one of the great sources. Yeah. And the other model is during the Holocaust itself, there are eyewitness accounts of Jews who were being taken to be killed, who even in that moment were expressing the Talmudic source that you just quoted. Even when a sword is laying on your neck, don't give up hope. The actual translation is a little different. It's don't remove yourself from mercy, from compassion. Don't give up the possibility of receiving compassion. So there were Jews who sang, and there were Jews who, even in the camps, put on tefillin, they put on phylacteries, they prayed. They prayed on Rosh Hashanah together, on the Jewish New Year. Elie Wiesel writes about that. He says, even in the camps, I saw a father give his last piece of bread to his son, and the son give it back to the father. No, you need it more. No, you need it more. That kind of kindness, that kind of act of altruism and love, even in a place that was filled with such darkness, is an expression, it's a recent historical expression of Jewish hope. And if they could do it there, then we can certainly do it now in our situation.
Can you give me some practical sort of, mindsets, maybe mantras, pardon the expression, maybe just some sort of thinking model for when we're feeling hopeless, when, the kids are not going back to school, or they are going back to school, or we're in terror, or we're afraid for our health, or economically we're struggling. Help us with some hope tools through the language of Wiesel and yourself.
Yeah, so I would say three things. Number one, the question is, what are some tools for hope in difficult times? Number one, we have to recognize that the feelings that you're describing, feelings of fear or sadness or anger, or whatever the feelings are okay. It's okay to have the feelings. It might not be useful to let the feelings drive the car. So the first thing to do very often is to say, it's okay that I'm feeling afraid. I give myself permission to feel afraid. And the second thing is then to find a way to express the feeling in prayer or in poetry or in journal writing or to a friend who will listen without trying to solve or answer. give some expression to the feeling. And then the third thing is find something specific and modest that you can do that's a step towards life. And it doesn't have to be big. Students would often ask Professor Wiesel in class, I write about this in my book because it was such an important moment and it happened often. They would say, Professor, you're a Nobel Peace Prize winner and presidents listen to you. And so you can make a difference in the world. But what are we supposed to do? We're just students. We don't have those connections. We don't have a lot of resources. And he would say, look for the outstretched hand. Look for the moment, look for the person, look for the gesture, the smile, the small act of kindness that will bring some hope or joy or connection to somebody. It could be doing the dishes in your own kitchen when everyone else in the family is busy. It could be, we don't walk down the street as much as we used to, but walking down the street, you would see someone hungry. We are faced with choices. Do we turn away? Do we see the person as a person? Do we give a little tzedakah, a little charity? Do we share a kind word? Those small things. And now I would say there's a lot of things we can do on Zoom. Check in on someone who's home alone, isolated. Give a phone call and see how they're doing. There are a lot of things we can still do that are small, modest steps towards hope. And when Professor Wiesel would tell us this, he would often quote the great writer Albert Camus, who wrote, "Where there is no hope, we must create it."
Oh my. So let me just quickly reiterate before I ask you your next question. So you feel the sensation, you give yourself permission to feel it. I am totally worried about my children and the experience of going back to school. I'm totally worried about our finances. What if I can't make my mortgage? Then I make it practical in whatever genre that speaks to me. Either I write a journal entry, I draw a picture, I put on some music that speaks to that sensation. So I integrate it into me and I name it, I act it. And then the third thing is what?
Is I do something positive, even if it's very small. But just one tweak to the second stage, which I don't think I said this clearly enough in the second step.
Good.
It's giving it expression, but giving it some expression that has yearning or a wish or an aspiration. In other words, I'm afraid that my kids are not going to have a great education because we don't even know what's happening with school this year yet, right? And it's August. We don't know what's happening with our school. So I give expression to that. I say it's okay to have that fear and that concern. But if you notice, hidden in that fear and that concern is a wish. I want my children to have a great education. I want them to feel connected and grow socially and academically, intellectually, and emotionally. And I really wish for that. So the second step is put that on paper, in a poem, in a prayer, say it out loud to somebody else, draw a picture that expresses that, do a collage, make a little vision board that expresses that. And then the third step is take some small positive step, some small positive action.
My gosh, what wisdom for living. Okay, so your book is called Witness. You said that listening to a witness makes you a witness. Can you unpack that for us a little bit, please? Like,
Sure.
What do we do in our lives to take action, help our families and friends also become witnesses?
So Professor Wiesel said that listening to a witness makes you a witness. And what he meant was that memory, which was such an important principle for him, the idea that we can learn from the past, that we can keep stories of the past and of people who are lost to us. He was thinking about people lost in the Holocaust, but it's true in general. We can keep those memories alive and we can take responsibility for those stories. He also believed that when I carry someone's story, I become a better person. I become more ethical, more sensitive, because I'm aware of the people who are sitting on my shoulders, the people whose stories I carry. I become a vehicle for those stories. I'm responsible to those people now. And so I'm going to act with a greater degree of sensitivity and compassion and courage. I'm going to do the right thing more often because of my contact with those stories. So listening to a witness makes you a witness means that when you encounter someone else's story and you carry that story, you now are a witness to the witness. And that gives you certain responsibilities and it gives you certain powers and capacities to overcome the internal resistance we have sometimes to doing the right thing or to extending ourselves for other people. And that's how moral growth happens. So on a very practical level, I often encourage people to find one story in your family, if you can, from a grandparent or great-grandparent. If you can interview someone still and they're with us, great. Do a little oral history project. Now's a good time to do it because people are accessible on Zoom, and often elderly people don't have a lot of activities in their life, so they need the connection and the contact. Gather stories and pick one story that you personally are going to be responsible to for the rest of your life. You're going to carry that story and you're going to tell it at every family celebration. Every time you write a blog post, you're going to think of that story. Every time you do work in your professional field and you're trying to do something that has good impact in the world, you're going to do it in the name of that story. You're going to make sure and have responsibility that that story does not get lost. And as we have fewer and fewer survivors with us, this becomes more and more essential, that we who are here today carry those stories and transmit them to our children, not in the overwhelming and not in the abstract way that sometimes happens. This isn't about big historical events. This is about putting a face on it and hearing the story of one survivor or one person who didn't survive, or one person in your family who went through the Depression in this country or immigrated or was a refugee. It doesn't matter. A story that has some weight to it, something that's moving in it, something that touches you. So carry that story because no one else will, and we need those stories.
Is that what you do? Is that who Elie Wiesel is for you? Do you carry his story as your history?
Among others, I do, yes. He has other students who carry his story as well. And of course, his son and his children's family, his wife, carry the story in a way that's much more deeply intimate and connected in important ways. So there are people who carry his story, but to carry his story also as a student also means to carry the stories that he carried, right? So he loved certain Jewish thinkers and books, and he transmitted that love to his students. So I carry that love as well for many of those books and many of those Jewish thinkers throughout history, whether it's Rabbi Akiva or the Baal Shem Tov or Rabbi Nachman or all these great Jewish thinkers and writers. That's one of the ways I think of honoring a great teacher, is to honor what that great teacher honored himself and what he loved himself.
This truly is the way we can live forever. At least our souls just go on and on. And you are such a spectacular witness. I cannot wait to sit down with that book. I'm sure that everybody on this meeting with us feels the same way. May you have the strength and the power and the clarity to continue carrying both his story and your story and the story of everyone who's moved you to become the incredible person that you are. Thank you. We are so, so grateful for you, honestly, for your time, for your inspiration, for all of it. I can't thank you enough.